Hi, thanks for tuning in. Dying ain't as easy as it used to be. You know, in the old days, we all grew up in town. Pretty much stayed in town. We worked in town. We had our kids in town. And we pretty much stayed in our own towns, our own neighborhoods. And along with that, we knew everybody, and everybody knew us, along with the morticians. And so when something happened, you could go to your local mortuary and you could tell them, okay, can we get all this taken care of? We'll get the life insurance money in, about a month from now, and we'll pay you then. And the morticians were usually pretty good with that. They were okay with that. Well, in today's society, we're a much more mobile, much more transient society. And we don't know everybody anymore, and they don't all know us anymore. And most of the mortuaries are now owned by corporations. They're not privately owned anymore. So what happens now is you go to the mortuary after someone has passed and you go through the list of the things that you do and do not want. And as you list the things that you do, they're sitting there and they're marking a price tag next to each of those items. And then at the end of the interview, they add up all the different prices for all the different items, and you have a grand total, and they hand it to you and they say, here you go, how are you going to pay for that? And they expect to be paid right then and there, at least the majority of the money, if not all of the money, and that presents problems. And so that's made things a whole lot more complicated than they used to be, but we have found a tool that will help bring things back to a simpler way of doing things. Welcome. Funeral trust is the simpler way, and we are going to talk about them through the course of this video, and we are going to answer three of the major questions that are associated with them. First one being, why would we want one, of course. The second one being, what are they exactly? And the third one being, how do they work? So let's get started. Why would we want one? There are two major reasons why you might want a funeral trust. One is the Medicaid rules on how much money you are allowed to have. In other words, the spend down rules. We'll get to it in just a minute here. The second reason being that when the money's coming from a funeral trust, it is immediately accessible upon your death, whereas with many other tools that you may have in place now, you do not have that immediate access to the money. So, Medicaid spend down rules. Medicaid will make you spend down everything you have until there is only $2,000 left to your name. This creates a major problem. The average funeral costs a lot more than $2,000. So now your family would have to pay all those costs out of their own pockets. The average funeral on the lower end of the scale, it's going to run about $4,000 or $5,000. An average funeral in the mid-range is going to run more in the $8,000 to $10,000, and of course then you can go as extravagantly as you want it. Any way you look at it, $2,000 is not enough. However, Medicaid laws also allow you to put up to $15,000 into a funeral trust, which is exempt from the spend down rules. Using this tool allows you to set aside enough money to pay for your funeral and all the associated funeral expenses. This, of course, then helps you to qualify for Medicaid sooner, and this lifts the burden from your family. Those associated funeral expenses we were talking about, everybody knows the normal ones, and those are, your standard items such as funeral home services, buying your plot, paying for cremation or embalmment, flowers. Those are your normal ones, but there are other associated funeral expenses that a funeral trust can also pay for that aren't always taken into consideration early on. And those would be such things as transportation for family members. Like I said, we live in a much more mobile and transient society now, so many times many of the family members do not live in the same town as the person who is deceased. And it costs money to bring those people in, for those services. Honorariums, we have to pay the minister, we have to pay the person who is providing the music or the singers. We also have transportation of the body. Very few of us actually die at a funeral home. Most of us die somewhere else. And so, of course, we have to transport the body to the funeral home from wherever it might be, even if that might be out of state, which also happens, once again, because we are such a transient society now. So the other big reason was that it's immediately accessible upon death. Many people think that that's also true of their CDs and their savings accounts or other places where they have maybe have put their money to pay for the funeral expenses. So let's go through those just very briefly here. First we have TOD, transfer on death. Those will only work with a death certificate. POD, pay on death, will only work with a death certificate, once again. However, a funeral trust pays without the death certificate, which gives you the money to pay for the death certificates that you will need to be able to access the money in all of the other accounts. And just so you know, it takes on the average anywhere from about 4 to 10 days to get those death certificates into your hands. So the fact that the funeral trust does not need it, it can immediately pay. We'll show you how here in just a second. So what is a funeral trust? It's an irrevocable trust with the sole purpose of paying all the associated funeral expenses. Irrevocable means that once it is set up, it cannot be changed. You cannot change the ownership of the trust. You cannot change the beneficiary of the trust. You can't change anything in the trust. It's irrevocable. It's written in stone. It will perform just the way it was drawn up to perform. Trust is an entity frequently used in estate planning to help a person distribute property or provide for a loved one after they have passed away. The trust is a written set of rules that will determine how, what, when, and where a gift or property is to be distributed to an heir or to a beneficiary. The beneficiary of the trust for a funeral trust is actually your estate. It has to be set up this way in order for you to qualify for the exemption from the Medicaid spend-down rules. How the money is distributed will be discussed in the next couple of slides here. If you used Medicaid to pay for medical expenses, in this case mostly what we're talking about is nursing home expenses. Nursing homes today run you about $6,000 or $7,000 a month. They can run a little bit more. Assisted living could be a little bit less, but nevertheless, however you look at it, that's a lot of money. And it can deplete a lifetime of savings in a fairly short amount of time. I mean, that's, $70,000 to $80,000 a year, and that's a lot of money. So if you used, once you run out of money, once you're down to your last $2,000, then people would apply for Medicaid, and Medicaid would pay for the nursing home expenses. However, if there's any money left in the estate, Medicaid comes back and gets that because, like I said, you're only allowed to have $2,000. So in this case, if Medicaid did have a claim on the estate for any assets put into the estate, after the trust pays for all of the funeral-related expenses, it then pays the remainder to the estate. Therefore, Medicaid will have the right to whatever was left over that wasn't actually spent on funeral expenses. On the other hand, if you had no need for Medicaid, you never went into a nursing home, you never applied for Medicaid, well then after all the bills are paid, the balance remaining goes to the family members designated as the secondary beneficiaries. The trust can pay it out either way in that case. They can pay it out to the estate and the will pay it out to the beneficiaries, or because there are no Medicaid claims, the estate can actually turn down being the number one beneficiary, and then the money can go straight to the secondary beneficiaries. That's how that works. So why haven't I heard of these? Why haven't you heard of these? The rules governing funeral trusts are in the Social Security Act publication inside Titles 19 and 26. You will find them talked about a lot on many of the legal websites, but it was extremely difficult to find where the law is actually written. I'm one of those people, I won't put out information until I'm 1,000% sure that the information I have is 100% correct. And I could not find where they listed the $15,000 as being the correct amount for a funeral trust. So bear with me here, I'm going to tell you the story of how I finally found it, because to me that was very important. So I go to the local Medicaid office and I talked to them about it, and they didn't know what I was talking about basically, but they sent me on to one of their specialists. So the specialist calls me back about 3 days later, and she also had no idea where this number could be found. It wasn't even too she really didn't understand funeral trusts right from the beginning. So she tells me, well, since it's a trust, all the trusts get sent on to the state office, the state Medicaid office. And so she gives me a name and a number, and I call that gentleman. I called him 2 or 3 times, and finally he returns my call, and he also said that he doesn't know where that number comes from, and he doesn't know where to find it, but he would pass me on to the legal department for the state Medicaid office. That lady never has called me back. In the meantime, I also went to a lawyer's office, a friend of mine, who actually deals in elder law, and he does wills and trusts and all of this, and we talked about it, and he also didn't know where this number actually comes from. So then I called another lawyer's office, and they didn't know. Talked to the insurance companies. Nobody knew exactly where this number had been published. But I kept digging, because I'm just that kind of person. I won't quit until I find the answer that I'm looking for. And I finally found it. It was referred to in the Tax Act of 1997, and that's what referred me back to Title 26 of the Social Security Act. In the 1997 Tax Act, they actually set a number in that one, and they said it was $7,000 at that point in time, with the provision to grow with inflation. And so now we can see how 20 years later, of course, the 7,000 has grown to 15,000. And if you look deep enough into the Title 26, they do little amendments and little changes on a year-to-year basis. So if you look through all of those changes, you will find it spelled out eventually that $15,000 is the correct amount. Now that's for federal. Colorado follows the federal rules. Not all the states do. So if you live in a different state, your number may be a little bit different. Most of the states follow the $15,000 rule, but there's 10, 12, maybe 14 of them that actually have lesser amounts. So you would want to know that you're dealing with the correct amount for your state if you live in a different state. These funeral trusts are not talked about or advertised in the Medicaid brochures because, of course, it's not in their favor. It means that if you take advantage of one of these tools, that's probably $15,000 more that they're going to have to pay out for nursing home care. So they're not going to tell you about them. From the story, you can tell they don't hardly even know about them, but they do accept them. You're not going to hear from most of the insurance agents because we're dealing with small amounts of money here, and they usually like dealing in amounts of money that are much larger than this. So it's pretty well kept secret, but it does exist, and they do work very, very well. So how do they actually work? Well, the minimum is $1,000, and the maximum is $15,000 here in the state of Colorado and many other states. This allows people to have both a prepaid plan and a funeral trust. And the reason I say this is because you will find in Title 19 they talk about prepaid funeral plans, but they don't put a dollar amount on those either. But many people already have, like, the funeral home is prepaid for, the casket's prepaid for, the plot is prepaid. And that's good, but as you also saw, there are other items that you can't prepay. The minister, you don't know who the minister is going to be. You can't prepay the transportation for family members. So there are things that you cannot prepay. So it's nice to know that you could put together a prepaid plan plus a funeral trust, so long as the two of them put together, you didn't put more than $15,000 into them. It's a death certificate needed to receive the funds. Unlike any other financial tool, you do not need a death certificate to get the money out for paying the funeral-related bills. So then you may think, well, then how does the funeral home get paid? Well, the funeral home simply faxes. Remember that worksheet we talked about right at the beginning where they list all the prices and everything? They fax that page along with the claim form to the trust. Then the trust sends the check out in 24 to 48 hours. How do we get the money inside of the trust? You actually purchase a small guaranteed issue life insurance policy. Guaranteed issue means they have to give you the insurance policy. Now, because it's guaranteed issue and because this is set aside specifically to be spent for funeral expenses, you'll find that there isn't much insurance actually associated with these. I had one lady, she was in her early 80s. We put in $14,800 to have a $15,000 policy. But this is what funds the trust. That's how the money goes into the trust and makes the whole thing work. The trust is created when you assign the policy to the trust. You don't need a lawyer, you don't need LegalZoom or anything else along those lines. The insurance company creates the trust for you free of charge. Are there any other fees? No, there are no other fees. There are no ongoing fees. There are no monthly fees. There are no yearly fees. There are no other associated costs. There's not a cost involved when the trust pays out. The insurance company actually pays you interest inside the life insurance policy, which is what funded the trust. So since they're paying you money, of course, the money does grow. The money in the trust through the life insurance policy currently earns about 1.5% in interest every year, which is actually better than what a lot of the banks have been paying us here recently. Will the policy stop growing then at $15,000 since that is the limit? The trust can grow to be more than $15,000, and that's okay so long as it started with $15,000 or less. So when it's growing at 1.5% a year, it most certainly can go over the $15,000. But the rule states that's the most you can put into it. It doesn't say it's the most that actually can come out of it. So that means Medicaid still cannot touch any of that money, no matter what it grows to. Where does the money come from to put into the trust? Well, most people get it from their savings. You can use CDs, you can use savings or old cash value life insurance policies to buy the new life insurance policy that gets put into the trust. Now, as stated, people go, well, I already have my CD, set aside, for these purposes. But as you can see, Medicaid could take it away from you, or your family could have trouble getting their hands on that money in a short period of time. Many times it takes a couple of weeks for that to happen. So it's better if you just move your funds from where they are now to the protected status and the easy accessibility that the funeral trusts provide. You might also be thinking, why can't I just put the life insurance policy I already have into the funeral trust? Or you might be thinking, why can't I just set up a funeral trust on my own and not have to buy the life insurance policy? You actually could, if you want to spend a lot of money to have a lawyer draw up the trust, and then spend some more money to do the tax returns necessary for these types of trusts, and then if you want to pay a trustee to manage it for you. You would also have to find a lawyer who could do it in 24 hours, for with our trust you can fund it today and apply for Medicaid tomorrow. Please understand, Medicaid nor any other creditor can ever touch this money. No one can touch this money, but this includes you. The money can only be accessed after you pass away. So let me repeat this. No one can touch this money, including you. The money can only be accessed after you pass away. So in conclusion, funeral trusts are exempt from Medicaid spend-down rules. They are liquid and accessible for funeral expenses, immediately liquid and accessible for funeral expenses. They are irrevocable. You cannot forget that part. Once the money is in there, it is in there. It is not coming back out until it is paying your funeral expenses for you. There are no fees. There's no setup fee. There are no annual fees. There are no fees. They actually pay you interest. You're actually going to earn money on the money that you put into the funeral trust, and that will eventually come back to your family if Medicaid did not have a claim on any of it. And they can be immediately effective. You can put your money into a trust today and apply for Medicaid tomorrow, and you're going to be eligible because these are exempt. So, if you'd like more information, if you want to see if it's an appropriate tool that you should be using, give me a call. My name is Ron Verostek. Phone number is right there on the screen, 303-776-0867. Feel free to leave questions and comments below. I'll definitely answer the questions and reply to the comments. We'd love to have some feedback and hear what you're thinking and see if there's any other questions that we might be able to answer for you. Subscribe to our channel. To hear other financial topics, subscribe to this channel. I'm also the author of the book Financially Intact. That book is about identity theft and a lot of the scams that are going on today, the popular scams. And so we're also going to be doing YouTube videos we do one on Medicare, I'm going to do one on identity theft and the popular scams and many other financial issues. I started Verostic Tax and Financial 30 years ago. The goal of the office is and always has been to help people keep their money in their own pockets. If we can help you accomplish that task some way, shape, or form, please give us a call, 303-776-0867. I'd like to also mention that if you're from out of state, I do have associates in other states who would be able to help you with these funeral trusts. So give us a call or reply here online, and hopefully we'll be able to help you. Thanks for watching. I hope you'll check in with us from time to time and see our new videos as they become available.